So, Zach Gregg, you are going to answer a lot of really hard hitting questions that I've been desiring answers to for quite some time. And the most important reason is because I'm getting ready to buy new bike parts, new bike equipment, new helmets, things like that. So, I want to know what I'm doing and what the trade offs are. But beforehand, I want to say, hey, how's it going? How's Colorado these days?
Oh man, life's good. I'm having a lot of fun coaching. We have our performance center that is up and rolling. We are introducing new tech as quick as we can acquire it. Uh, and it's super hot outside, so I finally have some sun on my face, the whole face, because I don't have cycling obligations, so I don't ride my bike anymore. Things are great.
So you're happy, you're healthy, you've got 12 or 15 or 20 athletes at nationals over the last couple of weeks. You're busy.
Busy. Yeah, I had 17 at Pro Nats, including para and junior athletes.
That's insane. That is next level insane. But it makes you just the right person to talk about here because we know in a world of marginal gains that there are really large gains that can be made with aerodynamics, but with aero come trade-offs. And unfortunately, we don't know what those trade offs necessarily are or what the gains are. You once, a long time ago, told me that aero is a lifestyle, it's a commitment. What do you mean by that? How much do we need to get down into the weeds in order to see benefits from aerodynamic purchasing, planning, thought process, devices, etc.?
Right. Yeah, I think arrow is a lifestyle because there's so much to know and learn. And when you start out, you say, okay, well, I'm going to buy whatever Remco has. And then I'm going to set my bike up exactly like Remco's and I'm going to go on a ride. And that ride is the worst experience of your life. And you're super uncomfortable. Your neck hurts. You don't really go that much faster. And you don't know why. And then the curiosity really hits you in another way, right? It's like Dunning-Kruger effect, where you at first think you know, and then you realize you know nothing.
So I'm at the point right now where I know nothing except for, I'm supposed to be on 165 millimeter cranks because that's what Tade rides. And I'm supposed to wear aero helmets in crits because that's what, Project Echelon is doing these days. And the UCI is throwing out all sorts of new rules to try to squash that creativity. But here we are. I want to start with the basics. All of the topics start with a unified language where we are told that if you do X, buy this piece of equipment, you will save 30 watts over a 40K, or you will save 50 watts or this or that at X, Y, and Z speed. What do these things even mean? How do we find a baseline so that we're comparing apples to apples?
Right. So when someone is trying to sell you something and they say that they are going to save you X amount of watts, it comes usually from a calculation that they've done in a wind tunnel. And so a couple of things about wind tunnel testing. They test these things at specific speeds, the speeds that they are assuming that you are going to ride their equipment at. And then they're using a baseline, which is just a person hopefully wearing, a standardized kit in a standardized position. And the only thing that changes is their socks versus a competitor's, or their helmet versus a competitor. And as a consumer, you're kind of assuming that and hoping that that's the case so that these watts translate into your riding. Um, that's usually something that they're going to list on the website somewhere if you do a little bit digging, or they'll tell you if you ask them. But at face value, it's up to you to decide how deep you want to get into that rabbit hole. So the watt saving for most pieces of equipment that people are marketing are going to be versus a baseline model at 45 kilometers an hour head on. And that what the wind tunnel is reading is grams of drag, and then they are spreading that over the surface area of the entire person. So there's this like plate underneath the person. They're pushing air or pulling air across the person, and they're measuring the grams of drag from this plate. Um, and in that process, they're then dividing it over the surface area of the rider. So a couple things that get a little bit tricky is that they can use very large riders in order to calculate these things so that the savings in terms of total watts are larger because the surface area of the rider is bigger. So it's additive to a point when you're adding all of these different trip lines and tires and things, but it doesn't add up to where you just coast and you can maintain 45 Ks an hour.
So you use some different uh, particular words,
Yeah,
head on. I believe that's in reference to the wind direction, right?
correct. So there's two testing angles. There's head on, so it's 0 degrees, and then there is an angle at yaw. And so yaw, I think it's like a sailing term or it's a flying term, but it is the degrees offset from head on that you're testing at. Um, and that's another thing that they don't normally disclose. So at higher yaw, certain things are better. And when you are paying for wind tunnel time and you've done all this R&D because you want to create this amazing product, like you're going to go to even extreme levels of yaw to find the fastest position that your equipment exists
Because in,
in.
in in real life, yaw is crosswind.
Right. And when you are traveling at 45 kilometers an hour and it is a direct crosswind, it's actually like 10, maybe 15% yaw or 15 degrees yaw. So you're never going to experience full 45-degree crosswind as you would think of it if you were standing still, because you are moving through the air. That degree of offset lowers. So the faster you move, if we were in an F1 car, the most yaw that they would experience is like 2 or 3 degrees, right? They move so quickly through the air that the air doesn't have time to impact them from the side.
So when we see the echelons stacking up in a crosswindy day in Belgium, Flanders, the Tour de France, whatever it happens to be, there's actually only a small angle change regardless of whether or not you're seeing a wind that is actually would be as a flag blowing directly across the field.
Yeah, that's a great illustration because they're not all stacked up shoulder to shoulder. They are offset, even though they're racing in direct crosswind a lot of times.
So another thing is grams of drag and watts. To be honest, I know what a watt is because I've had a power meter forever, but what actually is a watt of power? How do we get to using that term in bike racing as it is sort of a biblical, grand term that everybody understands?
Yeah, so power is essentially Newton meters over time, right? So, and this is why power gets a little bit interesting, or the perception of power gets interesting at different cadences, um, because we are calculating joules of force through the circle of the pedal stroke, um, and then uh, dividing that by your cadence. So, and that's your watts. So, but as it relates to aero and aero testing, um, that's where we're talking about this force plate and grams of drag, which is translated into CDA. And so that force plate also measures the whole system weight, and that's how you get your CDA. Um, it's just basically assuming your weight. So,
What is
um,
CDA?
and so CDA is the coefficient of drag for an area. And so that's the number that everybody talks about who are very interested in aerodynamics, or, they're speculating what the pro CDA is going to be compared to their own. And it's a number that you can kind of backwards extrapolate. And there's some on the road testing things that you can do to get your own CDA. Or you can just assume it from kind of your own eyeball wind tunnel and just go from there and see if that CDA works out using some tools like Best Bike Split and some other websites. But CDA essentially is any given area on your body, how aerodynamic it is. So if you are a smaller rider and you have a lower CDA, that's going to be the person who produces the least amount of watts to go a given speed. Where if you're a larger rider, your coefficient of drag for your area is going to be larger because there's just more turbulent air over that space. But in theory, A larger rider and a smaller rider could have the same CDA. It's just the amount of watts that it would take for each of these riders to go 40K an hour is going to be different because of the total amount of area that each rider has.
which is why it's often very stupid to even try to compare watts to watts between different riders because their bodies are fundamentally different. So, if you are much smaller than I am, and I have much broader shoulders than you do from years of swimming. Oh, it's true. Just because you were a lacrosse player, you know, but you know, me saying 300 watts to me might not mean the same to you or vice versa, right?
Correct.
So,
Or
yeah, so
that our goal pace is to go 45Ks an hour, right?
yeah.
So speed is king in time trialing. We're always trying to work back from the speed that we think is going to win a time trial. So
Yeah,
yes, our 300 watts would probably produce a different speed.
but we're not talking about time trialing anymore, which is going to make this whole thing complicated because the whole point of this is to talk about mass start racing.
Exactly.
But before we get there, I want to know what it means when bike company X says, our product, our bike, our wheel, our whatever it happens to be, will save you 30 watts, period. End of story. Like when they make a claim like that, it 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 sounds awesome because like I'm going to save 30 watts. So all of a sudden my FTP goes from 300 to 330. Is that how it works?
And really, the question is 30 watts compared to what? So and kind of all of the buildup goes to this, right? Where if they save you 30 watts, the question is 30 watts at what? What is the situation in which you save me 30 watts? So if it's in comparison to one of their previous frames, and they say that it's at 0 degrees yaw in perfect conditions at what you would assume would be your race speed, well, hey, now we're talking, right? The context fits what we need it to fit, and then hey, that's a huge savings, so that would be the thing to spend your money on. But if it's 30 watts at 12 degrees yaw compared to a round tubed aluminum bike with 8 speed on it, then what's that even worth? So I think none of these companies aim to be disingenuous, but they do aim to add enough trickery that forces you to question the context of the savings.
Because I once saw, and this is probably going to be our first topic, bike fit, where your hands are on the bike as compared to like, are you on the hood straight up relaxed? Are you down with your elbows bent? Are you in the drops? And it was, it said speed 30 kilometers per hour. And then there was a wattage number next to it showing the difference in how much wattage you need to, you know, put out in order to maintain that speed. Is that a fairer way to look at it?
Yeah, I think so. And as long as the speed is close to what race speed is going to be for you, then it's really workable data. So, in the context of the pro peloton in a crit, I mean, the speed is close to 50K an hour. And that wasn't the case 10 years ago. So the fact that the technology is continuing to improve, and everybody's thinking about their kit and their shoes and their tires and their frames and things like that, I think it's much more impactful now than it would have been 10 years ago because the speed is higher. And at higher speeds, this 1 watt savings turns into 2 watts or 3 watts. And things get a little bit more tangible in the gains that you get from slapping on all of these specialized components on your bike.
That which is the ultimate question because when you start talking about mass start races as compared to time trials, or gravel or something like that, where it's a singular effort. You're now dealing with a peloton, and if you're just looking at it and you're looking at the dynamics of all of the bubble and the people within the bubble, how important is aerodynamics when you're operating in a criterium or when you're operating in a road race? Can we say the two are the same, or is it because of the nature of criterium racing? Is it going to be different? How critical is aerodynamics when you're in an elite level peloton racing crits?
Right. I I think the principles that all of this are built on are anytime that you are pedaling your bike, you are experiencing aerodynamic drag. And even if you were following a large peloton of people, you are still experiencing drag. You're experiencing much less when you're in the draft, but it's drag all the same. So the three real pieces of I guess the three kind of topics that really slow you down, the three things that slow you down on your bike are going to be drivetrain drag. And so that's why everybody's waxing their chains and using these big old chain rings and all that kind of stuff. The correlation of rolling resistance of your tires and how they meet the road. So that's tire pressure and the type of tire that you're using. And then really the rest is just drag through the air of your body and your bike. And that is the biggest contributing factor. So that's 80% of the total resistance that you experience while trying to pedal your bike forward. So that's what and why we focus on aero so much.
So because the enemy of bike racing is always going to be friction, because that's the thing that's pulling you back, whether it be friction through the air, friction on the ground, or friction in your drivetrain, right?
Exactly.
Okay, because a lot of people are like, well, gravity, and you're like, gravity it just
Gravity's
increases
helpful.
friction. Yeah, it could be
Yeah.
helpful too.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about the two main ones that we can focus on here, which is rolling resistance, friction with tires and pavement, or aero resistance, which is friction of wind hitting the body and the bike, you're saying that 80% of your drag, 80% of the resistance is coming from the wind hitting you as compared to the rolling resistance?
Correct. So, and you can actually look this up. So, there is a website called Bicycle Rolling Resistance, and they have almost every tire ever made on this website. And it will tell you the CRR, the correlation of rolling resistance of any individual tire at a specified tire pressure. And then you just multiply by two, and that is the amount of resistance that you're experiencing due to your tires meeting the pavement. And it's in the range of 20 to 50 watts. And sometimes when you put on those training tires, it's the most telling experience of correlation rolling resistance, because usually they're a little bit softer, they're a little bit bigger, they're burlier, and you feel it the second you start pedaling your bike. So yeah, rolling resistance. It's a little less interesting unless you're like an R&D product guy for a tire company, because we can only buy what they sell. So get things that you trust. Try out a lot of different stuff at a lot of different tire pressures, and just kind of like figure that out on your own.
But like 80%, there's a lot of room for gain in one small area. And it makes sense now the way that you've explained it. You don't want to use the limited supply of kilojoules of energy that you have stored within your body, or the watts that you can put out on stupid stuff, when you could start hacking away at it. And I want to talk about ways to hack away at that aero resistance, that aero drag. And I want to start in a place that most people may not think to start, but I think the place you need to start is with the way that your body interfaces with the wind, as opposed to any part of the bike. Let's screw the bike, it doesn't matter. Like, I love people who are like, well, if I put on this bottle cage, I'm going to save 10 grams. You're like, yeah, well, you could also just lose 5 pounds, and that would be like way more effective than buying all of this stuff. So how critical is that interface between the rider and the air compared to the rider and the bike, or the bike and the air? That sort of theory. Am I right?
Yeah, you are. The rider contributes 90% of the aerodynamic drag. And part of that is the pedaling motion is very turbulent of the air. It disturbs a lot of air. There's new kind of research in aero that said that your legs are the most significant contributor of aerodynamic drag. Um, but yeah, your body position is the most important thing, and finding a body position that allows you to be aerodynamic at high outputs is a lot more of a trick than that people give it credit for. So we've seen a lot of turned in shifters over the year for people to try and tuck their shoulders in, and that works to a point, and then they kind of pop up and their elbows are flared out. We've seen the small cranks, and that works to a certain point. Um, I think that the people are trying in earnest to figure out the aerodynamic position as best as possible, because it is the most impactful thing that you can do, is be able to ride and race in that position.
So you would be a strong proponent of somebody going to a professional bike fitter and having your position dialed in.
Yeah. And kind of going back to it, because I think it's such a thing over the last couple of years, is like everybody wants to look like Remco, but nobody knows how Remco actually fits on a bike, right? So the pitfalls I think that people run into are related more so to bike fit than anything. So there's a maximum amount of flexion that you can have in your hips. There is the center of mass as it relates to your body on the bike over top of the bottom bracket that people get wrong a lot. And then there's just the fatigue and actually riding and training in this position factor that some people miss. So it can all culminate in a very unaerodynamic position halfway through a crit.
And but basically, if you can't hold the position, it doesn't matter how arrow the position actually is.
Correct.
So
The
like if you were doing like you and I have both done Church Creek, the ultimate 40K, 10K square, on each side, it's as bone flat as you can get. And if you have to leave the arrow position, you are sacrificing time and speed. The same thing happens when you're doing a crit or anything like that. Anytime that you can no longer maintain the most aerodynamic position, you sacrifice unnecessary power, right?
correct. So it's usually a little bit more moderate of a position than people realize, but having that bent arms, tucked head position where you feel very balanced over the bike and you don't feel the need to stand is pretty crucial. And having it so that you don't have a satellite head that we talk about, where it's like your head is like bobbing up way disconnected from your body, um, and then feeling like you can do your normal riding power output in that position is very important. So that's where the short cranks have come in over the years, is just being able to open up your hip angle and not have to change a whole lot else about your riding position and feel very balanced, because these big cranks take a lot more hip flexion to get over the top of the pedal stroke. And that's where people kind of experience a lot of discomfort, or it modifies the rest of their position because their body's trying to accommodate to get that uh, pedal over the top of the pedal stroke.
The hip angle thing I think is fabulously interesting because it doesn't make sense until you see it drawn out, until you get onto a fit bike and you watch as the crank arm gets shorter, your body can collapse more forward, but you're basically just shifting where your hip is over the top, and ultimately ends up with a more open hip angle, which means you can recruit more glutes and you can recruit more quads, which are the driving muscles that will. I know this is really strange to think that your glutes are driving anything, but my suit pants being super tight nowadays is an indication that they're doing something right. But you know that's why you look at time trial bikes and you'll see people riding much shorter cranks on a time trial bike than they necessarily would on a road bike, right?
Right. Yeah. And for our crit sprinters, the limitation there is a standing sprint requires the ability to put out a lot of torque through a very quick moment in time. And so going too short on your cranks can sometimes affect that torque moment when you're not used to it. It's something that's totally trainable. Um, but yeah, you're right. You essentially sit lower on the bike when you have the shorter cranks, because you can lean and hinge further forward. Um, and in the old school way of determining how aero you were, they would take a picture and upload it onto MS Paint, and they would count the number of pixels, and that would be your frontal area. And so as you become more squashed and closer to the ground and more tight and closed up, with your elbows kind of covering up your knees and your hips, your frontal area decreases, even in this very archaic model of just counting pixels.
Which nowadays we use little white dots and stickers, and you put them onto your wrist, your elbow, your hip, your knees, wherever it happens to be, and the camera catches those, and we can draw lines and angles if you're a quality fitter. uh, this idea of standing and the fact that you do actually stand in criterium racing as compared to in time trial where you never want to get out of the saddle at all is interesting, because that's the ultimate trade-off, isn't it? Because when you stand, you have a longer lever arm that you can drive down more force because there's more weight coming with your body, but you're sacrificing a whole ton of aerodynamic gain, right?
Yeah, and we saw it first with the Caleb Ewan sprint position, right? The head to the stem, essentially sprint position, because in those moments where you are sprinting and you're that is a high power race intense moment, you're going really fast. And any of this aerodynamic drag talk, as speed increases, exponentially increases the amount of output necessary to continue to accelerate. So if you're accelerating from 25 to 30 miles an hour, fine. That takes plus 100 watts of exertion. That's an entirely different training zone. Your heart rate goes up 20 beats. It's substantial. But in a finishing sprint, we're hitting 40 miles an hour. And so that's taking 1,000+ watts in order to accomplish. So thinking of the aero savings in a sprint that requires 1,000 watts, you're talking pretty substantial numbers. And fortunately, like some of the echelon guys are on the pursuit team for the US, and we've done a lot of testing with them. And the test speed in the tunnel is 40 miles an hour because that's how fast they go on their track bikes. And when you see a 1 watt saving there, you would never see it at 30 miles an hour. But if you see a 1 watt saving at 30 miles an hour, it's like 17 watts at 40 miles an hour. So it gets exponentially more expensive to not be in an aerodynamic position. And really the only time that you should be sprinting full gas in the wind is when you're trying to win the race. The rest of the
Which,
time, you should be as tucked as possible. And sometimes it's just not possible. But
so we have to go all the way back to Newton's second law, force equals mass times acceleration squared. So anytime that you are accelerating, that acceleration drives things dramatically, exponentially higher. So, the faster you get as a crit racer, the harder it is, because your mass is going to stay pretty much consistent throughout the whole course of the thing. The harder it is for you the more force you have to put in, basically. So anytime you change anything, you're going to have to change things dramatically. And when we add in aero gains, that change force requirement becomes just ever so slightly less.
right.
Okay.
And and if you think back a couple years, this is the entire basis of Legion's success.
Oh, go
So
on. Tell us
in
more.
in order to get off the front of a race when Legion was riding the front, you had to create an acceleration that got you around 7 to 8 riders in a single straightaway, substantial acceleration, and then you had to go faster than an 8-man team time trial. And it was impossible. you know so and it was very basic, but the execution was obviously perfect, I mean, for years, right? So it caused a lot of problems because there was no coordination in the peloton to get 5 people to commit to a monstrous acceleration to get around 8 people in a single straightaway and then work together at a speed that was basically unsustainable, because you had to go so much faster than the peloton to continue to get out in front of the Legion train. So, yeah, I think it's a great example of how aero gains have kind of changed crit racing, in that now people can get off the front and they can be super efficient and dialed because they can maintain these aerodynamic positions. And then it's man versus man, woman versus woman on who can pedal and execute better, because they're both going so fast and they're doing it for way less watts. So now they have extra capacity in order to stay out there longer.
But we should definitely limit chain size to 54 by 11.
Yeah, I think that's I think these rules are going to have some iterations and adjustments to them before we see them in their final form. So fortunately for crit racers, they don't have to worry about any of this for this year.
Yeah.
Um,
Hopefully,
but
ever fingers crossed.
the current UCI proposed rules would essentially take away a lot of aero opportunities with handlebar position and lever placement and things like that. And I don't think it would be productive for them to do so.
So before we leave the topic of the human body and in a bike fit position, I want to talk about the things necessary in order to maintain that position. So it's one thing to have a good, solid, quality bike fit, but how important is it to have the muscles capable of supporting that more forward, further forward center of gravity position? Because that is a ton of core and arm strength and shoulder and neck that I don't think that a lot of people are considering. Because I mean, the human head itself is ridiculously heavy, and your neck is supporting that, and then you wonder why on Monday after a long weekend of crit racing your entire neck and back is sore. So how critical is it that you've got the musculature necessary and train that musculature necessary to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can't be overstated anymore, right? Like these are very strong, capable athletes. They're hopefully all doing gym work. I know all my people are, and really the progression into this more aerodynamic position is fueled by a couple changes to bike fit. So the first one is a measurement called knee forward of pedal spindle. And so in that kind of like 3 o'clock position, the power phase of your pedal stroke, you, people's knees are way over the front of their shoe even at this point. So, and this is something that Specialized and Retool has tracked over the last couple of years. And so this is the World Tour Peloton on down that everybody's moving further forward. Um, and part of that is to open up their hip angle so that they can maintain a more aerodynamic position without it being so taxing and reaching that physiological limit of hip angle. Um, and so, yeah, you're seeing a lot more knee injuries, and you're seeing uh, kind of innovative solutions to having that much body weight on the front of your bike because your bike handles differently. It is very taxing to be in that position. So they're currently trying to figure out where to go next because it's causing knee injuries, it's causing all of these issues in the pro peloton. But people, once they have gone so far forward and figured out how to comfortably ride there, are not wanting to go back. So um, the strength training is a big thing. I think now one of the big focuses is on stance width, how your cleats interface with your feet, and how far apart spaced your feet are on your bike. Because gone are the days of slamming your shoes as close as you can get them because that's more aero, and knees touching the top tubes is like a good thing. Now it's almost the opposite in that you want your arches and your feet to be alive and active in your shoes and be able to stabilize the rest of your body. So um, yeah, it's definitely a tough landscape, but being able to support your body and being strength trained um, have a lot of positive benefits. So the act of doing any strength training shows really good time to exhaustion benefit and just overall body health. So, and I'm sure these crit racers, if they fall when they fall, will be glad that they have a little bit of extra muscle mass or just having been a little strength trained when they hit the pavement.
So it's okay. It is literally okay to have a little bit extra muscle mass up top nowadays because forever bike racers have been told that all you want to be is a pair of lungs and legs. That's it. Screw any biceps or triceps or whatever it happens to be. Those are vanity muscles that you only show off at the beach. It's okay to strength train. It's okay to have necessary muscle mass. I'm actually asking for me.
Yeah. No, it's a you're allowed.
Okay.
Yeah, and a big part of that is kind of the trend in crit courses, right? So we're not seeing the same amount of elevation that we used to see in crits. And so being a larger rider, committing to being aerodynamic is actually an advantage. So uh, to be strong and to really enjoy being powerful and fueling adequately is the way forward in crits.
So here, this is something that several cycling coaches and myself have argued about over time.
Okay.
The Zwiftification of American bike racing, where everybody only knows how to speak in terms of watts per kilo as compared to watts at FTP, which is, I think, a much more valuable tool in comparing yourself against yourself than watts per kilo ever will be. Because my understanding, and this is where the question comes in, is watts per kilo becomes relatively irrelevant as the road flattens out. Correct?
That's correct.
So, what should we be looking at? Because the obsession over not having a lot of mass is detrimental to, I think, a lot of especially younger bike riders. But, for those of us who can afford Ozempic and find the doctor willing to prescribe it, so it's like, how can I get so much, smaller mass? What are the things that we need to actually consider as good baseline metrics to compare ourselves against ourselves to show improvement in training and form?
Yeah, I think finding kind of power duration that means something to you and tracking that over time. So Training Peaks is okay at this, but there are other softwares that will give you basically your PRs for any amount of time, from 1 second to 3,000 seconds. And if your goal is to win XYZ race that has a 45-second hill at the end of it, you should be tracking your 45-second power at fatigue in a fatigue state. Um, and that's something that you can key off of and you can train and you can watch yourself get better at it over the course of the season. And when you go back to that race, you have the confidence that you have improved at the specific effort it takes to win. And then it's just down to the competence of putting yourself in the right position and doing all of the little things correctly so that you can show that off. Um, I do think kicking it old school sometimes is cool still, like watts at speed is an important thing. So it comes down to watts per CDA, watts at, so we're always trying to be faster for less. And so watts at a given speed, as long as you're kind of doing it at the same time of year or over the progression from spring to summer to fall. If you're getting faster for the same watts, that's awesome. But if you're going faster and doing more watts kind of on your local course, I think that's an important thing to think about also.
So somebody had mentioned once in one of the polls we put up, or tell me something comments that we put up, was the ultimate flex is no longer who puts out the most power in a crit. The ultimate flex is the person who puts out the least amount of power for the highest placing.
Oh, we go back and forth constantly, don't we?
Yeah.
It depends on if Michael Garrison is in the room with us or not. You know,
Okay.
I
He
think
does put out a lot of watts.
we will never be done with the guys that just want to hurt in a race, right? And but I do think that technical skill and utilizing like smart training methodology outside of racing and then being very bored in the race is a super successful strategy. And I think it takes a lot of really good coaching to get people who are very strong to be very bored in races. And
So you got me on this.
yeah,
I agree 100%. The problem is that coaching has to be done on site or on video. It can't be done. You cannot human go that sort of stuff. You actually have to have a coach interface with an athlete in real life, not from behind a keyboard, right?
yes and no. So there are so many limitations, right? Like I would love to be at every race. I mean, after the experience at nationals and being there for over a week, with athletes. Like that's all I want to do, Um, but if you are going to commit to a virtual coaching relationship, I think the coach needs to find inventive ways to convey these points, right? So one of the things that we do at Apex is we have athletes write their perfect race. So not afterwards, but before. Tell me your expectation. How does this race go perfectly for you? And a lot of times, if I'm coaching Michael Garrison, which I don't, Michael's telling me that everybody just forgets about him and he rides 405 million watts for the entire race and collects all the premiums for himself, and that's the race, right? And but when you're asking this to someone who's coming up through the ranks and they tell you that, you're like, well, that's not realistic. You're not Michael Garrison, right? Like, so thank you for telling me, and now we have something to work off of, right? So their perfect race in their mind is what they came up with on their own, and then through collaboration, you set the expectations of, well, that's not realistic. So what's next, right? And you craft their perfect race within the parameters of racing, which is, okay, these are your tools and this is what you want to have happen, but this is how racing normally goes. And so you just work backwards from the goal. Like the perfect race always involves you winning, or you leading out a teammate or whatever. And so how do you win realistically? And that's really the trick.
So
Because
I find it interesting that the majority of the aero drag on the human body, which is
yeah,
80% of the overall drag on the bike, comes from what is happening below the waist. Yet we're spending so much time focused on handlebar width, arm position, helmet material, all of those things. Whereas if it's just the lower part of your body, how do you put that into a fit? How do you put that into a position? Because again, we could go dork out on rubber compounds and pounds per square inch of tire pressure, but that's marginal. You've got to look for the biggest things.
yeah. And it's a funny one because again, like the body of research and knowledge is constantly changing. And so we're updating our understanding of things as quickly as we can. So going back to some of the track testing that we've done, people have dropped their saddles and become more aero, and then they just figured out how to ride with a lower saddle. Um, do I recommend that? No. And so it's always a question of how much is it worth, right? So if you're saving 5 watts by your saddle being 2 centimeters lower, but you can put out substantially less power, then it's not worth it. So there is this tug of war constantly of do we focus on aero and that's it, or do we train the athlete and make some compromises and think of things in kind of like a holistic point of view, and as we get new information we just adjust. So like the things that we're like the current common understanding, right, is that tucked head position, elbows at 90 degrees, hands nice and relaxed because you have weight on your saddle and on your feet, and your feet are well supported. You have aero socks and either lace up shoes or shoe covers on. um, you have some trip fabric on you. You have either a big aerodynamic helmet on or a small aerodynamic helmet on, depending on the day and what your restrictions are with your team. Um, Aero gloves are kind of a contingent point, but always protect your palms. So again, if you can't race the next day, it's not worth looking as aero as possible. Um, and then really from there, it comes down to power production, position maintenance.
So one of the trade-offs, and this is one that I struggle with, is heat. As you add on aero benefits in the form of clothing, shoe covers, helmets, you're going to decrease the amount of evaporative cooling because you don't want the wind to get anywhere near those components of your body. But that brings its own sort of problems. Can you explain?
Yes. And this is one that, again, is becoming more and more like an important feature within even kit design, right? So, and I've talked to athletes about this. Like the biggest points of heat transfer on your body are your palms, the bottoms of your feet, and your face. So if you're covering up two of those with stuff, it really limits the amount of heat transfer that you can experience quickly. So, um, I don't like, I can tell you kind of what we do, right? So if it's above like 75 degrees, the recommendation is to not wear shoe covers because it's such a heat transferable point. Your shoe moves around, 90 RPM a minute the entire time. So you can spray a lot of cold water in your feet and not have it impact anything else on you. The integrity of the shoes is great at this point. So, yeah, keeping your feet cool, keeping them vented can be a really big gain. And again, with the aero helmets, the airflow over your face is one of the most impactful kind of things. So having the big visor on the aero helmet is not something that a lot of the guys enjoy. Uh, and test this with your own aero helmets, listeners. But the visor on a lot of these helmets is so tightly wrapped around the helmet that it can actually mess with your perception of depth and kind of space. So be very careful with wearing visors on aero helmets in bunch racing. So you can wear the actual helmet, right? Like you see people with the arrowhead or the laser with sunglasses on more and more often, but the visor still has not made the transition as much. So, and some of them aren't even legal. Um, so just be careful with that. If it causes you to crash, it's not worth wearing.
Yeah, that's probably a fair point. But among the things that you put on your body,
Mm-hmm.
what is probably the biggest watt saver? Is it the helmet? Is it the shoe covers? Is it the kit itself? What is the biggest bang for your buck there?
So from what we've seen, so we have very little aero data on helmet selection in bunch racing, just as a team. And we can give Colby some flack from this for this, but he just didn't test the aero visor. He just assumed that it was faster, or not the aero visor, the aero helmet in bunch racing, and it became kind of this thing, and so he kind of stuck with it. But we don't have any data on it, so it could be slower. We don't know. The laser is a super fast helmet, so it's not slower. We just don't know what kind of to the degree. But the biggest gain that you can make is in your socks, because your calf is a cylinder that is going up and down, right? Like it doesn't necessarily rotate, but it's a cylinder that moves in space. Cylinders are very unaero in comparison to airfoil shaped things. So having a specialized pair of socks that you got from a reputable company that you know is aerodynamically designed is the biggest instant aero saving.
So this is
Uh,
something like a Defeat Jet or Evo or
yes.
something along that line.
Yep. Anything with the external tripping. We're sponsored by Defeat. Defeat makes an awesome product. They're not cheap, so you got to take care of them, but they fit great. They don't fall down, and they are currently the fastest sock in the world that is commercially available and verified on lots of different body types.
And if they do start to fall down, there's glue and things like that that you can use on your skin to sort of glue them back up. I've seen Tyler do it, Tyler Stites do it. And then I've seen some women at Redlands not do it, and they ended up having pooled socks on the bottom of their shoe or top of their shoe.
Yeah, I'm a big calf person, so I have to make special accommodations. But the yeah Mueller Prep Spray is something that is supposed to go on your skin, so that's the one that I can recommend on your podcast.
Great.
Um, and yeah, because we used to spray down everything. We took it way too far, and you just be covered in goop all the time. But yeah, so number one is definitely your socks. Aerodynamic kit is super important. I know a lot of people are going to be limited by who they work with from a kit perspective, but the most aero kit that your company offers is what you should be wearing in a Criterion.
What is tripping? What does that word mean? You've used it a couple of times.
Yep. So trip fabric is designed to disrupt airflow in a specific way. And so tripping can either be indented tripping, where the majority of the fabric is flush and then there are divots. And this is the old style of aero fabric that has been around for a long time. And then now there is external tripping, where there's like a base layer of fabric and then there are trips that have been sewn on over the top, or there's two layers and the trips exist underneath underneath a top layer of fabric. And the thought with the more substantial trips is that it disrupts more airflow And by disrupting more airflow, you can have air collect in certain pockets. So the biggest one is right behind your upper arm. And so the air that collects, if as it's supposed to, who knows if this actually happens in a bunch race, if it collects under your armpit, then it's supposed to propel you forward and create a negative pressure area. And so that's what these trips are trying to do. They're trying to grab as much air as possible and create negative pressure so that you, in theory, go faster. There's also trips that are designed to direct airflow over your back in a certain way so that it collects behind your butt. And kind of the same thing on when you're the only one on the road and you're on an aerodynamic time trial bike or whatever. We know that that works. We don't know the implications in bunch racing as much, but we do know that being around other people actually gives you aerodynamic gains. And so we're always trying to direct airflow as best we can in predictable ways so that we can make informed decisions on what does what and why.
So why are we stuffing stuff down our front part of our jersey nowadays, as opposed
Yeah.
to putting it behind us where you would think there would be a negative space?
So it diverts airflow more efficiently around your hips. And so they found that even when they're doing these simulations and modeling, if you have a little bit of a gut, you're actually more aero if everything else is the same. And so kind of the same is to be said about the upper chest. It's trying to get ahead of diverting the air around your hips by diverting the air around a smaller object and having it more easily flow around the back of your body. And now you have to be careful because there's I guess it depends on the rules and what level of racing that you're doing, but they are paying more and more attention to fairings, especially in those kind of prominent spots, because there is a benefit to them. So
So
if
like
you're
putting something in the front part of your jersey that would stick out like a V,
like a
probably
V,
not a good thing.
it
Not a fair thing.
if you are allowed to do it, then it will make you faster most likely. And the size of it is kind of up to debate on what's the right size for that fairing. But like in a UCI race, you can't store a bottle long term in the front of your jersey anymore because it could be aerodynamically advantageous.
But it's
So
also just feels weird to shove a bottle down the front of your jersey.
if your skin suit's super tight, it's way easier than putting it in the back. You know, if you got to get a bunch of bottles.
So that actually brings up the point about the skin suit, because you see all the sprinters in the world now using skin suits. I don't like skin suits because they're uncomfortable for me.
Mhm.
You know, I guess I'm just a curmudgeon like that. Is there am I sacrificing a lot by not wearing the skin suit? And then why?
Yeah, so it's basically like any edge can be a trip. So by having a separation of jersey and bibs, there is that kind of edge that exists, and it could be a trip. It could manipulate things. The kind of other part of that is the tightness of the fabric on you. This is probably why you don't like wearing a skin suit, but wrinkles are trips, and so minimizing the amount of wrinkles and the collection of fabric in areas just gives you a more predictable flow of air over your body, right? Again, we're just making a lot of assumptions when you're just throwing on a kit and going out for a ride of how aerodynamic it can be. But the less variance that we can introduce, the better our guess is going to be. So
So
that's why you wear a skin suit.
okay, you've got me. I'll pony up some more. Jackaroo will be really happy to get more money out of me, but whatever.
Yeah, perfect.
Uh,
And the
you
new
know,
one, the new one has, back to your heat point, has thinner fabric on the torso for that reason, because we did the testing with the core sensors wearing their very lightweight jersey versus their skin suit, and there was a substantial difference in cooling because they put trip fabric everywhere in an effort to make it the most aerodynamic piece of kit possible. And the fabric has a certain amount of stretch when it's in trip. So it's like it was not as cool. So then we complained about that. Like we're the worst. We just complain about everything. But now it's like the external tripping on the arms is super aero, and that's kind of like the new consensus piece of material. And then the rest of it is very lightweight, breathable through the torso, so that when you do splash water on yourself, or when you are trying to sweat and cool yourself down, it's easier to do so.
So I don't want to get into a big discussion about the bike frame
Yeah,
itself because Cannondale is Cannondale, Specialized is Specialized. You have access to what you have access to. Ride it. But when it comes down to the interface between you and the bike, things like the dishing of the wheel that you're choosing to use or the depth of it, or the position of your handlebars in turning the handlebars in, how much of, let's start with the handlebars, how much of that is the cool, I look cool factor versus this is actually of some benefit? Because we've got people going from 42 centimeter bars down to 36s, and then you've got flaring below it, so it gets really complicated real quick. But what like what is there?
yeah. And I think people are moving back from this a little bit. So the super turned in, we just call it like the junior position because junior guys will try anything. The super the super turned in hoods and the very flared handlebars uh, kind of create upstream issues. And upstream, I mean handling issues on the bike, kind of wrist and hand pressure that's not sustainable, elbow flare, that satellite head situation. So really what you're looking for is a handlebar that closely matches the width of your shoulders. So some people have very narrow shoulders and they need narrow handlebars. A little bit of flare is totally fine. A lot of flare, like you're riding a gravel bike, is not okay. And then you want a pretty neutral lever position. You want them to be between 0, as in they're pointing straight in front of you, to about 6 degrees in, just to follow the natural motion of your wrists. More than that, as you fatigue, your elbows are going to flare out, and then they become kind of their own objects in the wind. So, and this does go back to time trial a little bit, because all you want is your elbows to be either parallel or slightly inside of your hip joints. So by them being super, super narrow and you being almost like you're riding a time trial bike on your road bike, it doesn't make you any more aero. And the exception to this would be on the track where everything is very specialized. Um, but yeah, most people should be riding between a 38 and a 40 centimeter handlebar and have their shifters pointing almost straight out, maybe a little bit in, just depending on how their morphology of their hands and wrists are. And when you're looking at yourself in a mirror straight on, you want your elbows to eclipse your hips.
What about your elbows vis-a-vis where your wrists are? Because when I ride, when I've got the hood straight up, my wrists are slightly flared out from where my elbows are.
Like you're tucking your elbows in more than your wrists.
Yeah. Yep. Bringing it in on my body because Zach Gregg once told me to try to make my shoulders as narrow as possible.
Well, narrow is arrow, you know. So,
Yes.
and if it rhymes, it has to be true. But no, I don't. I don't it's typically everything's in line, right? So, and however you can maintain a right angle formation between your forearm and your upper arm, and a relaxed head position where your head is not floating in space way above your body, and you're able to slightly shrug and relax your upper body, that's the position for you. And so doing all of that and attaining that position is kind of contrary to the crit racer slammed stem zero spacer hardcore front end that we've become super accustomed to over the years. So there are some modifications and maybe some uncomfortable changes that these crit racers might have to make to their bikes to get in that position, but long term it'll be
But
better.
with the head tucked, you lose visibility
Yeah, so think about it this
downrange.
way, right? So all we're trying to do is again with like your total frontal area is hide part of your face within your body. Um, so the old style of like cueing these things is essentially pushing your chin to your stem. So all you're doing is craning your neck forward, And in that motion, you can still totally look up the road. So nobody's asking anyone to put their head straight down and not have good visibility, but we're trying to close all of this and scrunch you into a smaller box than if you were just riding normally with your head up.
Yeah, I was watching one of the lower category races on Saturday or Sunday, and one of the younger guys was off the front, and his head was all the way down. So it was just all you could see was the top of his head, and he was hammering away so hard. And I was just like, moment you don't see what it is up in front of you, you are going to end up with your face flat down on that pavement. And, you
Right.
know, if you crash, you're not going fast.
You are always faster on your bike.
Yes.
Yep.
So
So all of the science in the world means nothing if you fall over. So that's what we're trying to avoid. We want people to finish races safely.
the last topic um, is the aero specific bikes versus the more, I guess, the Venge versus the Tarmac, the Super 6 versus the Evo, or
Mhm.
System 6 versus the Evo. Like, we've seen bikes fade in and out of popularity, or bike frame types. And so we've gone back to the all arounders, but now I'm starting to see and hear about these more aero road racing specific type bikes coming back into design. I know this is a can of worms, but what are your thoughts?
They are definitely coming back. And I I think I think at some point everybody wanted a bike that could do everything, and so it got a little bit of bad press to have a specific aero bike or a specific climbing bike, and so they tried to make as many concessions in modeling their bikes and staying current. And now I think aero is cool, and the manufacturing processes have gotten so good that the bikes all weigh the same, or they all meet the UCI weight standard for minimum weight, 6.9 kilos or 6.8 kilos. Um, so now they're more willing to play within the aero, big foiled shape kind of bikes again. Yeah, the new, what is it? The new Factor, the unreleased Factor is very aero looking, especially in the front, and then it trims down a lot towards the rear. I think we'll see a lot of those, and they might be not our favorite looking bikes for a while, but that wide fork with long airfoil shapes seems to be the fastest. And usually the new tech for road bikes comes from the track, from the most recent Olympic cycles. And there were a lot of very big tubes on these bikes at the Olympics, especially in the front. Um, and the first slide they ever show you when you take a class on aerodynamics is a very big airfoil shape. So kind of fat in the front, and it tapers down. It's a little bit curved, and then a dot. And the aerodynamic drag of both of those shapes, a massive foil and a single cylinder, are the same. So um, that's where we're at, right? So we're moving back to big shapes because if everything is the same, weight, construction, stiffness, all that stuff, then the bigger shapes are more aero.
So these new UCI rules are bound to screw everything up. We joke a little bit about 5411, and the fact that my 5310 is now not going to be rideable if I was a UCI rider. But we're also looking at limits on handlebars, looking at limits on dishing and depth of wheels. I think that I mean, I've got 808s that are floating around that I crit rode on or crit raced on for a while. Is the UCI going in a good direction with this, or are they just trying to do what the UCI does, which is screw people like us who want to have fun?
Well, fortunately, for most people, any UCI rule is not going to impact them, no matter how severe it sounds. Um, and then, really, I think what they're trying to do is find ways to make racing safer. And they're, to their credit, that's in earnest what they're trying to do. Unfortunately, they don't ride. None of these people have apparently ever ridden a bike or in a pro peloton in the last 20 years, so they're very disconnected from reality when it comes to what they're trying to implement. um but hey, what do I know, right? So yeah, I don't think any of this stuff will stick. I mean, the good thing is that so many companies have made incredible 60 mil, 65 mil deep wheels that it's not going to be some like thing where everybody slows down because of it. And it's only for mass start racing. So when you see those big 100 mil deep wheels in time trials, they're still going to be there. Um, and really, like a lot of the testing we've seen is like the 65 mil deep is almost as fast, if not identically as fast as deeper wheels. Um, Up to the point of where they're 100 mil deep and you would never want to race a crit on them. So um, I
But you
don't think
can obviously time trial in the Olympics with double disc, so
you
and
can
do
time
well.
trial at nationals with double discs because
Oof,
a couple of people tried it.
that's bold.
They didn't
Well,
win. So I don't, the jury's still out, but it was a bold play indeed.
well, Zach Gregg, thank you for helping us figure out what new gear I will be buying this year. So thanks so much for that.
Of course, happy to help.